Good day, everyone. I am Sir Edgar Arisa, and I will be your teacher for today's lesson. Our objective is to prove theorems on parallelogram rhombus. In proving theorems, it is important that we are familiar with the different properties of a parallelogram and rhombus. To understand further this lesson, let's begin for our discussion. Our lesson is about theorems on parallelogram rhombus. What are the properties of parallelogram rhombus? The properties are needed in proving theorems on it. There are two theorems on parallelogram rhombus. The first one is diagonals of a rhombus are perpendicular. In our illustrations, diagonal AC and diagonal BD are perpendicular and form right angles. The second theorem states that each diagonals of a rhombus bisect opposite angles. In the given figure, diagonal BD divides the angle B and angle D in two congruent parts, while diagonal AC divides the opposite angles A and C into two congruent parts. So, let us prove these two theorems. The first theorem states that diagonals of a rhombus is perpendicular. Given the illustration of rhombus rows, and what we are going to prove is the diagonal RS is perpendicular to diagonal OE. We will use again the two-column proof in proving. The first statement is missing, and given is the reason. What do you think is the first statement? Okay. The first statement is rhombus rows. Next statement is we have OS is congruent to RO. Why do you think they are congruent? Yes, by the definition of rhombus. State that rhombus is a kind of parallelogram that all sides are congruent. For the next statement is missing, but the reason was given. So what is the given reason? The diagonals of parallelogram bisect each other. So going back to the figure, what are the diagonal that bisect each other? Yes, RS and EO bisect each other. If RS bisect EO, that would lead us to the next statement, that H is the midpoint of RS. So what do you think is the reason? If your answer is AO bisect RS at H, then you are correct. Okay, next. Remember that if the diagonal bisect each other, then it divides the diagonal into two congruent parts. RH is congruent to SH and AH is congruent to OH. Why did we have such statement? Because of the definition of midpoint, that H is the midpoint of the two bisecting diagonal RS and EO. Next, we can have the sixth statement, which tell us that OH is congruent to OH. What do you think is the reason? By reflexive property. From the previous statement in number 2, number 5, and number 6, it will lead us to the next statement, which tell us that the triangle RHO is congruent to triangle SHO because of the SSS congruent postulate, or the side congruent postulate, that state that if the two triangles and their corresponding sides are congruent, so the two triangles are congruent. If you're going to get the another statement from SSS, congruent postulate, given that triangle RHO is congruent to triangle SHO, we have the angle RHO is congruent to angle SHO by CPCTC. That means corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. For the next statement, we have angle RHO and angle SHO are right angles. So why do we have this statement? Because angle RHO and angle SHO form a linear pair and are congruent. What should be the last statement if perpendicular lines met to form right angles? So, we could state that RS is perpendicular to OE since RS and OE are the two diagonals met at point H. These two diagonals form a right angles as they bisect each other. Now let's prove theorem number 2, which states that each diagonals of a rhombus bisect opposite angles. We have here given rhombus VWXY. Let us prove that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 and angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Again, let us use the two-column proof. For the first statement, the reason is given. So what is the given? The given is rhombus VWXY. Next statement tells us YW is congruent to WX and XY is congruent to YV. By what reason? Okay, because of the definition of a rhombus which state that all sides are congruent. So, what is the next statement if the reason is reflexive property? Diagonal YW is congruent to YW by reflexive property. Next, we have the statement triangle YVW is congruent to triangle WXY. Why did we have this kind of statement? It is because of the SSS congruent postulate or side congruent postulate, which tell us if the two triangles in their corresponding sides are congruent, therefore the two triangles are congruent. For statement number 5, state that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 and angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Why? Because by the help of statement number 4 and reason number 4 on SSS congruent postulate state that if two triangles and their corresponding sides are congruent, therefore their corresponding angles are congruent. And what is the reason? Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So, those are the proof of two theorems on parallelogram rhombus. Before we end this discussion, remember this class. In proving theorems on rhombus, you need to be equipped with knowledge and skills on theorems, properties, definitions, and other postulates related to it. And that ends our lesson for today. I hope you understand it very well. If it's not clear to you, you may go back to the lesson presented in your module or watch again this video. But if it is clear to you, congratulations! You may now answer the exercises in your module. Good luck and thank you for watching.